I'll go ahead and get through that a little bit. I'm not going to get into the birth of the sons here. But I will go ahead and cover a little bit more material. Then Jacob continued on his journey and came to the land of the eastern peoples. There he saw a well in the field, with 3 flocks of sheep lying near it, because the flocks were watered from that well. The stone over the mouth of the well was large. I guess they had to make sure that wandering vagabonds or maybe wild animals didn't get into the well. When all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone away from the well's mouth and water the sheep. Apparently it took some effort to move this stone. Then they would return the stone to its place over the mouth of the well. Remember, these people, now, they could be they're protecting this against wild animals to some degree. But I get the impression they're probably doing it protecting against people they didn't want to have use this well. And that goes back to some of the disputes they had over wells, even in Abraham's day. Like, people fought over wells. People fought over water. Like, we haven't really seen any fighting, like fist-to-fist fighting break out, but they're quarreling. They've quarreled over these wells. Jacob is going to quarrel with these shepherds a little bit over this well. So, like, these people were used to fighting each other. Maybe not physically, maybe physically. We haven't really read that. But they were used to quarreling and arguing, disputing and debating over water. We don't really do that anymore. I think that's hard for us to imagine, having to fight over water. But these people did. Jacob asked the shepherds, "My brothers, where are you from?" "We're from Haran," they replied. He said to them, "Do you know Laban, Nahor's grandson?" "Yes, we know him," they answered. Then Jacob asked them, "Is he well?" "Yes, he is," they said. "And here comes his daughter, Rachel, with the sheep." "Look," he said. So she wants to water her sheep. She's a shepherdess. "Look," he said, "the sun is still high. It is not time for the flocks to be gathered. Water the sheep and take them back to pasture." "We can't," they replied, "until all the flocks are gathered and the stone has been rolled away from the mouth of the well. Then we will water the sheep." So apparently they had to get all the sheep together so that all the shepherds could roll the stone away from the well together. So until then, they're just going to sit around. While he was still talking with them, now I am not by any means a pasture man or a shepherd, so I have no idea what the daily habits of sheep are, okay? I can't tell you how close this is to normal in terms of what you're supposed to do with sheep or not. The impression I get is that these guys didn't want to bother with the stone until there were more of them gathered there to move the stone. But Jacob wants to move it so that this attractive young lady can get her sheep watered. And I think he's feeling pretty motivated. While he was still talking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep. He's going to do it himself. He's motivated. These other guys are sitting around waiting for a bunch of other people to come help. This guy is motivated because there's one beautiful woman there that he wants to impress. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud. Oh, he's really taken by this woman. He had told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and the son of Rebekah. So she ran and told her father. So this is his nephew. This is Laban's nephew coming along. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he hurried to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his home. And there Jacob told him all these things. Then Laban said to him, "You are my own flesh and blood." Let's go ahead and finish this next section. After Jacob had stayed with him for a whole month, Laban said to him, "Just because you are a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be." So he doesn't want to be a freeloader, but he also doesn't want to be a slave, okay? He doesn't want to stay there without doing his share, but he also doesn't want to do all this work for free. And Laban, as the owner, there has to be some sort of agreement here. Laban shouldn't get a free worker just because he's a relative, but Jacob also shouldn't get a free place to stay just because he's a relative. Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah. We already met one of them already. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes, or delicate eyes, but Rachel was lovely in form and beautiful. I don't know what that phrase, weak eyes, means. Is that an idiom? Is that some weird ancient Hebrew expression? I don't know. Did she really have weak eyes? Like, did she have a problem with her eyes that made her unattractive? I don't know. I really don't. I never have been able to tell what that means. At any rate, Leah was not as attractive as Rachel. She may have even been ugly. I mean, maybe that is a way of saying that she was ugly. I just don't know. Like, I legitimately don't know what that expression means. But we know that Rachel was lovely. I mean, we saw how Jacob reacted when he first saw her. Okay, when he saw her, he was motivated and inspired enough to push away a stone that apparently normally would take a team of guys to move, just because he wanted to impress this girl. So he was definitely taken with Rachel from the moment he first saw her. Apparently he was not taken with Leah. Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel was lovely in form and beautiful. Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, "I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter, Rachel." Laban said, "It's better that I give her to you than to some other man. Stay here with me." So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel. They seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Now again, we often think of this as like a young man, okay? Like this is a young man's infatuation here. He's like 25 years old, and he's just head over heels in love with this beautiful... I mean, she may have been 20. I don't know how old she was. The Bible doesn't usually bother with the women's ages. Okay, so I don't know how old she was. She may have been 50 years younger than him. I don't know. He's like 74 or something like that. So in his early to mid 70s. Okay, we often think of him as being like 25, but he's actually more like 75. Okay, she may be 25. She may be 20. I don't even know. She may be like 15. I don't know. Okay, I don't know what her age is, but I know that his age is somewhere in the 70s. So this is not a young man, at least by our standards. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife. My time is completed, and I want to have sex with her," or lie with her. Jacob was pretty passionate about this. We saw him kiss Rachel right from the moment he first saw her. That's the first time we've seen a man kiss a woman. We read about Adam and Eve coming together to produce sons. We didn't even read about them kissing each other. So Jacob was pretty open in his passion for Rachel. So Laban brought together all the people of most of the kissing that's been going on in this book so far is in between men, by the way. So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. But when evening came... By the way, what Rachel and Leah had to say about this doesn't matter at all, okay? We may have a problem with that, we may not like that, we may think that's wrong, whatever. But no, the negotiation here is strictly between Laban and Jacob. Rachel has nothing to say about this. Leah has nothing to say about this. All right? Their opinions, their input, their advice doesn't matter to anybody in the slightest. That's just something you're just going to have to accept. Like at that point in time in that region of the world, that was not a consideration in anyone's mind. And that's just how it was. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and gave her to Jacob, and Jacob lay with her. Now, I'm assuming this has to have happened at night when it was dark. It says when evening came. Jacob may have been slightly off, slightly intoxicated. It must have been dark in the room and he couldn't see. Leah and Rachel must be somewhat close to the same size, so that because he had sex with her. I mean, that's what he wanted to do. What he wanted to do with Rachel was have sex with her. So clearly he did have sex with Leah, thinking she was Rachel. So, you know, it must have been around the same. The 2 sisters must have been around the same size. It must have been dark in there. Jacob may have even been drunk. Leah could have been wearing a face covering. She could have had on some kind of a veil that covered her face. I'm assuming Leah didn't speak much. Maybe she moaned as part of the sex, but I'm assuming she didn't speak much. It could even be that Jacob legitimately doesn't really know Rachel's voice. I don't know how much time they would have spent together. Probably very little. You know, they probably would have spent very, very little time together before coming together. So he may not even be able to tell the two sisters apart by their voice. I don't know. But he was surprised by this, so somehow the wool was pulled over his eyes, just like he had done to Isaac. And Laban gave his servant, and Jacob lay with her, Leah. And Laban gave his servant girl Zilpah to his daughter as her maidservant. When morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, so he was pretty shocked when the sun came up and the drunkenness wore off and the ecstasy and the excitement. And he saw the woman in bed was not the woman he thought it was going to be. So Jacob said to Laban, what is this you have done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me? So Jacob now knows what it's like to be deceived. The trickster has been tricked. Laban, by the way, didn't necessarily commit to giving Rachel to Jacob. When we read about that back in verse 19, his answer is pretty evasive. That would have been 7 years earlier, of course, but he managed to frame his answer in a way that Jacob heard what he wanted to hear, not necessarily what Laban said. Laban replied, it is not our custom here. Maybe it's your custom there, but it's not our custom here. It is not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this with daughter's bridal week. Then we will give you the younger one also, in return for another 7 years of work. And Jacob did so. He finished the week with Leah, and then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. So he finally gets Rachel. Laban gave his servant girl Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her maidservant. Jacob lay with Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than he loved Leah. And he worked for Laban another 7 years. I used to think that Jacob didn't get Rachel until after the second 7 years. He actually gets them both at the same time, well, week difference. But he has to work another 7 years after marrying Rachel to pay for Rachel. But he doesn't have to wait the extra 7 years to get her. He gets her after the first week with Leah, but he has to work another 7 years after that to get. That's actually, I didn't know that. Like legitimately, for a long, up until like 2 years ago, for a long, maybe even less than that, for a long time, I thought that Jacob had to work 14 years in total to get Rachel. He did, but he didn't get her until after the 14 years. That's what I legitimately thought for a while. I just thought that. Like, I must have been taught that at some point in my past, whether it was at Sunday school or church. Yeah, I went to Bible school up until 8th grade. I had that in mind literally until like a year ago. We did an Old Testament history study last year, and just for the first time ever, when we were going through this section, it just kind of dawned on me that, hey, wait a minute, he actually got Rachel at the 7-year mark too. He got them both at the same time, well, a week difference. And he had to work. It's like, that just was like, wow, I didn't know that. Like I had always, so somewhere in my past, probably going back to when I was a very small kid, I had gotten the idea in my head that he didn't get Rachel until the end of the 14th year, but that is not accurate. He got them both at the end of the 7th year, but had to stay there again for another 7 years to work for Rachel. He ended up staying an additional 6 years with Laban on top of that, and we'll get to that later. And that's important because, as I said earlier, that Jacob's timeline is extremely weird. And it's going to get really tricky with these sons that are going to be born here in just rapid fire succession in the next chapter. And it's actually kind of important to realize that all these sons are coming out almost simultaneously with each other. Okay? So you don't have like a long gap where Leah is the wife of Jacob and Rachel is not. And they're having sons together while Rachel is still not being able to have sex with Jacob. Like, they're all open for business, like, right away. You have Leah, you have Rachel, then you have the maidservants, Zilpah and Bilhah. And so we're going to have a lot, and of course with pregnancies, there's going to be like a 9-month time frame for the delivery. and then a couple months. In the law of Moses, you had to let the woman rest for a period of time after she had a child before you started trying to have another kid with her again. But again, this is before the law of Moses, so I'm not sure if they necessarily were bound by that here. So you have that. I think it's a month for boys and 2 months for girls. And so, but again, I don't know if Jacob followed that, because that's later on that gets added. So I don't know. But the timeline is going to be, the Jacob timeline in general is extremely, extremely, extremely weird. And it's going to get really finicky here in the next few years of these kids being born, just one after another, after another, after another. Again, we know that Jacob will be born when Joseph will be born when Jacob is 91 or so years old, and that'll be at the end of his time with Laban, when he's with Laban for about 20 years. So you're going to have those 12 kids, the 11 sons and Dinah, who are going to be born in about a 12-year stretch, from like year 7 to year 19 or 20 or something like that. So that's a lot. I mean, that's a lot. Benjamin comes along later, so he's not really a factor in this. So, I also wanted to say one last thing before I'm done for the night, that the Bible paints a picture here of a very dysfunctional family. When we go back to the blessing situation with Jacob and Esau, we have the husband, the wife, and the 2 sons, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Esau and Jacob, who none of them are on the same page. They're all communicating in different directions. They all want different things, and they're all vying with each other to get what they want. The husband and wife do not want the same thing. The 2 sons do not want the same thing. The sons are cross purposes with the father, or Jacob is at least. Isaac wants to give Jacob the blessing, or Esau the blessing, excuse me. Rebekah wants to give Jacob the blessing. They're not communicating. The sons aren't communicating. So it's not. I mean, it's not a pleasant picture. I don't know exactly how it got to be that way. Way back when Rebekah was pregnant with them, she had this message from God that the younger would serve the older. So maybe she's trying to make that happen. I'm not really sure. At any rate, you do have a picture of a family that's not communicating well, and they're playing favorites. Isaac's favorite was Esau. Rebekah's favorite was Jacob. Jacob will have that same problem too. He's going to play favorites, and that's going to cause a lot of damage. That's going to cause a lot of damage in his immediate family, and that lingering result of that will cause damage to the Israelite nation throughout its history, because they're never going to really be able to get along all that well. And you can trace a lot of that back to the hostility they had with each other when Jacob had favorites when they were young. So you do see kind of a picture of a dysfunctional family that the legacy of that continues on generations down the line. It's just there. Like, it doesn't offer really any commentary on that. Like, it just records what happened and that's it. It doesn't really say that, it doesn't offer like any additional moralizing statement that this was bad or this was wrong. It just says it. It just says it and leaves it at that. So, okay, that's it. Hope this worked, and I gotta actually go through my videos and label and file them properly. So anyway, but that's it for tonight.